Welcome everyone to another episode of ACUNN. My name is Amanda Simpson and I'll be your host for this evening. In tonight's show, we'll be discussing the controversial issue of the proposed changes to the Racial Discrimination Act, in particular Section 18C. The Racial Discrimination Act was written in 1975. In the current version of the Act, Section 18C states the following: It is unlawful for a person to do an act otherwise than in private if the act is reasonably likely in all circumstances to offend, insult, humiliate, or intimidate another person or group of people, and that the act is done because of the race, colour, national or ethnic origin of the other person or some or all of people in the group. Tony Abbott, our current Prime Minister of Australia, has proposed changes or repeals to Section 18C of the Act. He has proposed that the words offend, insult and humiliate be removed from the Act and replaced with the following: It is unlawful for a person to do an act otherwise than in private if the act is reasonably likely to vilify another person or group of persons or intimidate another person or group of persons, and if the act is done on the basis of race, colour, national or ethnic origin. It is important to note that for the purpose of this Act, vilify means to incite hatred against another person or group of persons, and intimidate means to cause fear of physical harm to a person or to the property of a person or to members of that group of persons. We here at ACUNN will be looking at this issue with regards to how it affects human dignity, which is a Catholic principle of human flourishing and defines how we act towards each other in everyday life. As with any public debate, there are always two conflicting perspectives to acknowledge when discussing the proposed changes and human dignity. Tonight, we'll be joined by Tim Wilson, who is the Human Rights Commissioner, and Nova Peris-Kneebone, Australian Senate for the Labor Party. Welcome to you both. Thank you for having me. Hi, thank you. Now, as mentioned, there are two very different perspectives on this topic. Tim, is it fair to say that you believe the law should not limit the free exercise of expression, because dignity is violated when people are not allowed to freely express themselves, especially with regards to their deepest value? Why, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. I am the Human Rights Commissioner for Australia, and it is my opinion that it is our most fundamental human right to be entitled to free speech. Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media, regardless of frontiers. So is it fair to say that you agree with Tony Abbott and his proposed changes? They are essential, yes. Nova, I believe that you may hold a different view on the Racial Discrimination Act's proposed changes. Look, I too am an advocate for human rights and ensuring every single human has their dignity upheld. I believe these changes will open the floodgates to racial discrimination and hate speech. In my elected position, I'm the voice for the minority groups of Australia who have the right to equal protection by the law from any form of discrimination. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that I am entitled to protection regardless of my race, colour, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion. I have the right to freedom from attacks upon my honour and reputation, and the right to freedom from cruel and inhumane, degrading treatment. So, would you say that you hold the view that human beings have a right to freedom from racial vilification, where racial slurs cause offence to the extent that they begin to limit a person's freedom to participate in society? They can also be said to violate dignity and then should be restricted by law. Yes, I believe this to be true. However, I don't believe that dignity can be taken away based solely on one's participation in society. As mentioned at the beginning of the program, I would like to discuss the proposed changes with regards to human dignity. Bearing in mind that Catholic social teaching states that each and every person has value, are worthy of great respect, and must be free from slavery, manipulation, and exploitation. So, with this in mind, I ask you both, why do you believe that human dignity plays a vital role in your views? It is my belief that we are all entitled to human dignity, regardless of our race, age, sex, gender, or social standing. We are all entitled to equal dignity, simply because we are human beings. Look, I don't necessarily believe that anyone shouldn't have their human dignity upheld, so let me just set that straight right now. But I believe that free speech is a vital part of having our human dignity. If you take away our ability to speak freely, then you take away our dignity. So Tim, do you believe that dignity is something that can be taken away? It shouldn't be, but yes I do. Nova, would you say that our human dignity is inherent simply because we are human beings? Or would you say that our human capabilities play a role in our rights to human dignity? I don't believe one's capabilities need to be assessed when it comes to human dignity. Any human being, young, old, fully abled, or disabled, deserves their human dignity upheld simply because they are human. Thank you for clarifying this. I would like to hear further about your individual views on the topic. In order to do so, I believe we need to learn a little more about each of your backgrounds, as this will play a vital role in why you believe what you believe. Tim, would you please tell me a little about your upbringing and whom you associate with in today's society? Well, Amanda, I come from an Anglo-Saxon background. I'm 34 years old and have been raised in a nuclear family, whom have always played an active role in the society in which we live in. I come from a Catholic background, although in recent years I've taken a step back from my role within the church community. Would you say that you consider yourself with the majority of Australians or part of the minority when it comes to those who will be most affected by the Racial Discrimination Act changes? Being a proud homosexual, I do believe I fall into a minority group here in Australia. However, when referring directly to the issue of race and the Racial Discrimination Act, I am part of the majority. Nova, you're a very proud Indigenous member of our community. How do you feel your upbringing and social norms you have experienced may affect how you feel about the proposed changes? I believe my upbringing and cultural heritage play a major factor in why I'm against the proposed changes. Unlike Tim and the majority of Australians, I've been deeply upset on numerous occasions by people in public platforms offending my culture, people, and my race. I'm very proud to be an Indigenous Australian. However, I know of many others within my communities who are not so proud. This is because they are repeatedly exposed to negative and humiliating speech about our culture. As it stands, Section 18C allows us to bring justice to those who publish hate speech in places other than private. If the changes do go ahead, we'll not have any legal framework to protect us from the emotional effects of racial discrimination. The new changes will protect you from any intimidation and physical harm, though. Yes, but what about the emotional abuse and harm caused? Moving along. Tim, are you aware that fellow member of the Australian Rights Commission, Dr. Tim Savasan, who is Australia's Race Discrimination Commissioner, disagrees with you on your views with regards to proposed changes? I was not aware of this. Well, Dr. Tim Savasan does agree with you when it comes to human dignity, in that he views dignity as something that can be taken away. However, it's because of this that he believes that each human deserves to have protection from racial discrimination. His main concern is with the underlying interest of freedom of speech. He views racial vilification as something that takes away the freedom of those being exposed to it. We obviously view the importance of freedom of speech differently. I believe that freedom of speech is in fact allowing all peoples to exercise their rights to human dignity, and that without it, their dignity may be lost. I believe Dr. Savasan would agree with me. From my research, he strongly believes that dignity is something that humans can acquire or lose through a sense of self-worth. May I interrupt for a moment? Dr. Savasan believes that someone who is frequently exposed to racial vilification will begin to lose their self-worth, therefore losing their sense of dignity as well. Dr. Savasan quoted that those on the receiving end of abuse can feel more than just anger or indignation. There is also humiliation, self-reproach, and even self-loathing. I don't want to live in an Australia where people can be exposed to such things. While I agree with the severe emotional effects that racial discrimination can have on a person, I don't believe their human dignity can be lost, as we're all human beings, and as humans, we will always have a sense of dignity. So Nova, do you envision an Australia where everyone is treated equally, regardless of any beliefs or their background? Therefore, anything published that is likely to offend, insult, humiliate, or intimidate another person or group should not be tolerated. Yes, I do. It's my belief that this would uphold everyone's dignity by seeing everyone as the same person with the same amount of dignity. Therefore, each person should be treated the same, simply because we're human. I believe that all Australians should treat everyone with the same amount of respect that they themselves would expect to receive. As we were told as children, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But it is every single person's right to freedom of speech. Where does it state that you have the right to not be offended? And how do we filter this? What offends some may not offend others. It's for this reason that we need to repeal the Act and ensure that every person is free from vilification and intimidation, which can be determined easier than someone's level of offence. Tim, are you familiar with Kent Grunewald? Yes, I am. Kent has written in the Columbia Law Review on the topic of free speech justifications. Kent agrees with me that if freedom is taken away by limiting what people can say, we cease to respect their dignity as equal human beings. I believe Kent may have a slightly different view on human dignity in regards to free speech though, Tim. How so? Well, Kent sees everyone as equal human beings, which puts his perspective in line with Nova's. Yes, however, if you look further, it is clear that he views dignity as something everybody has based on one or more human capabilities, such as autonomy, freedom, or morality, which then makes his perspective slightly different from my own. You see, he views freedom of speech as a human capacity. Very good point, Nova. I see you two are familiar with Kent's work. I think we can all agree that this topic, and the topic of human dignity alike, are very complex, and no single person has the exact same views as another. Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you one final question. Although you both have very different views on human dignity and the right reasons why we do or don't have it, do you believe that Racial Discrimination Act can be looked at solely within one perspective of human dignity? Or would you agree that by looking at only one perspective in isolation, it may jeopardise the others? Although I don't necessarily agree with Nova in that humans have dignity simply because we're humans, as Human Rights Commissioner, I do have to acknowledge that we do have certain rights as human beings simply because we are human. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Therefore, I do see the importance of not only looking at human dignity within my own perspective or quadrant, but within looking at it through all aspects of this. I can definitely acknowledge that in order to adequately dissect the topic of human dignity, we do need to look at it from many different perspectives. Similarly to a human being, we are very complex beings made up of many different attributes, such as psychological, emotional, physical, moral, sexual, and spiritual beliefs. Therefore, it would not be possible to look at a human being from just one perspective only. I believe this to be similar to the topic of human dignity. If we look at it from only one quadrant or perspective, we would in fact jeopardise the other perspectives or attributes. Well, at least that's one thing we can all agree on. Thank you so very much to the both of you for coming in this evening and sharing your views on the proposed changes to human dignity. Thank you very much for your time. You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I would like to take this opportunity to delve a little deeper into the multidimensionality of human dignity. It's important to recognise all quadrants of human dignity. Human dignity is something that both something that we already have and something that we strive to acquire. Behind me, we have the 4 quadrants of human dignity. 1A, dignity that humans already have by being a member of the human species. 1B, dignity that humans already have by having distinctly human capabilities. 2A, dignity that is something humans can acquire or lose through a sense of self-worth. And 2B, dignity that humans have that can be acquired or lost through moral or immoral behaviour. If we were to consider human dignity from only one of these perspectives, then the other aspects would be jeopardised. As Nova was saying earlier in the show, if we were to look at a human being, for example, as a human being is very complex. We are made up of many attributes that define why we do the things we do. They can be put into categories such as creative, symbolic, rational, historical, interpersonal, and moral. If we were to look at a human through only one of these attributes, we'd be missing so much of that particular human. For example, if we were trying to divulge why Nova feels so passionately about 18C and its proposed changes, by only looking at her social attributes, who she associates with, etc., then we'd be missing a giant part of why she believes the things that she believes. We would need to look at her spirituality, historical, and moral backgrounds also to have a proper understanding of her views. The same principle applies to human dignity. If Category 1A is the only category considered when looking at Racial Discrimination Act and human dignity as a whole, then a person's dignity would be viewed as something that cannot be taken away, which would mean that these changes really would not affect anyone's dignity. On the flip side of that, as Nova expressed her view, is that every single person should have their dignity upheld simply because they're a member of the human species. If you were to look at just Category 1B, that if freedom is taken away, then you are no longer considered human. As Quent Gonerwald believes, that freedom is a human capacity, and without it, you are no longer considered human, and would therefore not have dignity. If Category 2A is the only category that we consider, then each person will be looked at as an individual rather than looking at society as a whole. The major issue, as Tim brought up earlier, is that every single person is different. Each person will have their own ideas as to what affects their self-worth and what does not. Therefore, you cannot really base the law on something that is almost impossible to be measured. Finally, if 2B was the only quadrant considered, then the law will be based on how people behave in society. But who is to judge what can be said and cannot be said? What is right and what is wrong? Everyone's idea is different. This would be because of how different each person is, and that, as we mentioned before, we're all multidimensional. We're nearly out of time on this episode of ACUNN. I would like to leave you with a few final thoughts about the Racial Discrimination Act and human dignity. Both of our esteemed guests this evening have made very valid points for and against the proposed changes to 18C of the Act. Tim believes that free speech is vital to human dignity, and that without it, we would lose our dignity. Nova, on the other hand, believes that dignity is something we all have. Because of this, every single person is entitled to protection under Australian law from racial discrimination. Since the filming of this interview, Tony Abbott has cancelled his proposed amendments to Section 18C, and the laws remain the same. A decision that has delighted minority groups all around Australia. Until next time, I'm Amanda Simpson. Thank you for joining us at ACUNN.